How you doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and as you see, we're back at it breaking down the latest in Mets land. And in our Big Mets Update segment, February 25th, 2025, we have plenty to get into on the front of Starling Marte, and how now, more than ever before, there's a greater reality that he will not be on this opening day roster. Why exactly is that? Who could the Mets trade him to? What could they get in return? That's what we're going to deep dive, as well as what is happening with the Mets utility position. That final roster spot, if they're not going to bring Mr. OMG back and stay internal, is it going to be Brett Baty? Is it going to be Luis Angel Acuña? Is it going to be someone else? Let's further break down who makes most sense in that role internally and why, as well as a key update on guys like Kodai Senga, among others. And thank you guys so much for smashing that like and subscribe button on your way, and it really does mean a lot. Let me know your initial reactions down below in the comments. Simply put, are you for or against a Starling Marte trade? And as we smoothly transition into this one, everybody, where does this stem from? Well, it goes directly in hand with what we saw transpire just a night ago that many of you guys saw on the platform already, and that is the Mets acquiring, yes, 24-year-old outfielder here in Mr. Alexander Canario from the Chicago Cubs for cash considerations. And the reason why we have to bring this up after our video yesterday is because we've let some time and let some things marinate over the past 24 hours, and since then I've seen numerous Cubs fans be against the fact that they parted ways with him, as Canario was one, DFA'd by the Cubs over this past week, that many were against happening, and secondly, when asked about Canario's upside, it became abundantly clear that the only reason why the Cubs parted with him is because they didn't have a fit for him on the roster. Now, here's the thing. Why would the Mets go out of their way to acquire a 24-year-old outfielder who certainly has pop, who certainly has upside that we broke down yesterday, and we'll do exactly that right here, right now, but why would they go out of their way to bring in someone like him who doesn't have any minor league options? Well, it makes 10 times more sense to do a move like this because, one, you're giving him an extended tryout, obviously, for spring training to see what you can get from him, and two, it's also to lessen the blow for when you're inevitably going to trade someone like Starling Marte that the Mets have been actively trying to do since the start of the offseason. Let's not forget that, everybody. And in case you guys don't know Canario, make sure to check out our video from yesterday, but simply put, this is a former top prospect from the Chicago Cubs that has a lot of upside. His limited sample sizes in the major leagues the past couple of years, he has absolutely raked, which is why the stat lines look as strong as they do down below. And Canario now, who has a lot of power, who has a lot of pop, but also has a lot of versatility as an outfielder who can command center, can command the corners without a problem. Why would the Mets bring him in when you already have guys, obviously, like Brandon Nimmo, Juan Soto, Tyrone Taylor, Jose Siri, Starling Marte, obviously, Jesse Winker, Jose Asgar, who hit a home run in spring training yesterday. The time it goes on and on and on with their outfield depth, but by trading someone like Starling Marte, that's where this makes 10 times more sense. So much so that I actually understand why you would even consider someone like Canario in a platoon DH situation with Winker. Because let's be real, why have Starling Marte on this roster for north of $20 million in the final year of his contract in such a limited role when you know he does have value and he could be more beneficial for a team that'll actually maximize his usage versus being in a very limited role here like what we're having going with the Mets at the moment? And that's the big question, right? And for Marte, this goes back to the beginning of the offseason. Let's not forget that. Literally going back to the very start. A lot of rumblings are starting that the Mets are considering shopping someone like Starling Marte. I even mentioned in my video in the early goings of the offseason that the Mets could part ways with Marte if they get a suitor to salary dump him, or if they eat the majority of his salary, maybe have a semi-mutual trade to get going, then it would make sense. But now with the Mets having an abundance of pitching issues, with both Frankie Montas and Sean Manaea out for an extended period of time with one, and the other is a big question mark with Manaea that we know, but he might be out for a number of weeks with the likelihood that he's going to start the year on the IL. All the more reason to make sure that the Mets make sure that they have proper players in position for the rotation, for the outfield, and for everything in between, but especially that depth front. And if you don't want to spend on the 110% tax that you have, Mr. Steve Cohen, then you're going to go down the trade route. And the reason why the Mets have been actively trying to part ways with Marte since the start is twofold. It's one, you brought in Juan Soto, so you already have such a limited role for him. And two, the guy is still a serviceable player. Let's not act like Starling Marte is a bad player. He's not. He's going to probably hit for high contact for any team that's going to have the luxury of acquiring him this offseason. But Marte was transparent with the media when speaking in the early goings of spring training that both before and after the Mets acquired Juan Soto that they were actively shopping Starling Marte. They tried trading him, going back to the winter meetings to the Kansas City Royals for reliever Hunter Harvey. That's pretty much like a younger Ryan Stanek in a lot of ways. That didn't happen, obviously, but they're still actively shopping and pursuing a Starling Marte trade as we speak. So the great question is, okay, if you're going to trade Starling Marte, which it's looking increasingly likely right now, because Canario, I'm perfectly fine with giving him an opportunity on this roster and a split platoon situation at DH with Winker based on matchups, because this is the type of guy you do that with, knowing he doesn't have minor league options. Maybe the Mets have confidence that they could sneak him without being acquired if they DFA him towards the end of spring. I find that hard to believe, even with all the roster crunches going on from now up until opening day. Canario, I think, has enough upside for this Mets team to actually see what they have in him throughout an extensive spring training. Hopefully the tryouts go well throughout there. And then the roster spot to have him face mainly lefties in a platoon situation with Winker, or maybe get some more reps in the outfield as well. Maybe you want to take some days off for Brandon Nimmo late in game for a late game replacement because of the plantar fasciitis. Maybe he's barking on him. Maybe one of Jose Sear or Tyrone Taylor is down with injury for a period of time, God forbid, knocking on wood, obviously, and you want to make sure you have backup options. That's where Canario comes into play. So for the Mets, how do we get a trade going for someone like Starling Marte, and what makes most sense? In my opinion, what makes endless sense is pitching. If you're going to trade Starling Marte, you were trying to acquire a reliever for him originally. Could you try to pull off something for a starter? Is that at all in the realm of possibility? Let's get into exactly if that is in fact possible, and let's hear from former Mets GM Jim Duquette, who spoke on SNY tonight furthermore on what the Mets may do there if they're going to part ways with someone like Marte and maybe make some moves on the pitching front that are external and not internal.
Route. How can they bolster this rotation using the trade market?
Yeah, so there's still some options on the trade market too. I mean, I like Emmanuel's option of bringing back Quintana. I said that last night, but there are some trade possibilities. Now, I know everyone wants to go to Dylan Cease, and I don't get any sense still that he's still available, but there is another pitcher who pitched very well in New York, albeit he was with the Yankees, and Jordan Montgomery. He's over there in Arizona still, didn't have a great year last year. His ERA was over 6. But, you know, there's an interesting way you could maybe match up with the Diamondbacks on this. Starling Marte's salary is very close to Jordan Montgomery's. There's only about $1,750,000 difference between the two. That's easy to make up the difference. You know, I think the Mets would be getting still a very good starting pitcher. He has something to prove. You know, he can pitch in New York. He's still young. He's in his early 30s, 32. And, you know, it's hard to find a fit for Marte right now. And he had already asked for a trade, you know, this winter. So I don't know. I'm trying to find a marriage here between two teams with, you know, guys who are looking for playing time or pitching. I think that's a pretty good fit with the Diamondbacks.
So let me start by saying, no, I don't love the idea of a Jordan Montgomery type, but at the same time, I also don't hate the idea if it's pretty much of a bad contract for bad contract swap in the final years of their deals. Why does this make sense for the Mets? They need pitching right now, and Jordan Montgomery has upside to be a 1 through 4 starter for you without question. I know that he was underwhelming last year with the Diamondbacks. You know, expected numbers were better than his baseline ERA, which was very inflated, but in just over 100 innings, Monty, he faltered because, one, he was on the World Series hangover after being traded from the Cardinals to the Rangers midseason in 2023, winning it all with them being a huge weapon in their rotation to help win the World Series that year, and then to ultimately come to find out in 2024, doesn't sign until basically spring training's done, like Blake Snell, because they're both Scott Boras clients, sells a short-term high EV with an opt-out there with the Diamondbacks, but opts in after what was a very underwhelming year because he did not have a normal spring training regimen, and he's coming off of the World Series hangover. I think it just kind of common sense that if it was going to happen to anyone, Jordan Montgomery is that guy to have it down 2024. Now he's looking to have a normal 2025. The Diamondbacks would love to part ways with him. They have solid pitching depth as is, and they could utilize a guy like Starling Marte as a veteran leader on that team, and honestly could probably get some more time right now in their latitude degree than maybe what he would otherwise be getting with the Mets, because I know that they just brought back a guy like Randall Grichuk, so I know that they have their pieces there in the Diamondbacks, but I also know that that is a team that could certainly use more, and as someone who Starling Marte had a short stint with Cattell during their time both in Arizona, no, they're not related, funny enough, I do think that there is a route where where that would make a level of sense for the Mets if the Diamondbacks have interest. Now, other opportunities that the Mets could seek, obviously, there have been rumblings going on with a guy like Eric Fetty that I'm sure we'll talk on more in the future. Mets have been long linked to Fetty over the past year plus, going back to when he came over from the KBO a year plus ago. That we saw there originally was batting practice for the Nationals that we all know very well. Comes back. David Stearns just misses on signing him as he gets a more guaranteed starter role with the White Sox. Is traded in a 3-team deal with the Dodgers and the Cardinals to St. Louis at the deadline last season. And then, bam, he's already a trade chip for the Cardinals, who are going to be retooling this year, obviously trying to part ways with guys like him, Nolan Arenado, among others. So I would keep an eye on Fetty. I would keep an eye on Montgomery. And I would keep an eye as well as more, I shouldn't say full swingman types, but guys that would make sense for the Mets right now are upgrades over what they currently have. Because right now you have the Tyler McGills, the Griffin Cannings, the Paul Blackburns, and then you get into the Justin Hagemans and the Max Krennics of the world. They have their swingman types, they have their starter depth types, but after losing both Montas and Manaea, I think it goes without question, you want to add more there, and you want to add at least a guy that can help eat innings for you. So if you're going to do it in the trade route, those are some guys that may be of intrigue for the Mets and others, and I would love to hear any other trade options that you guys have in the comments down below. But simply put, if Marte is going to be in such a limited role for the Mets as is, it at least makes sense to part ways with him while acquiring someone that's going to immediately impact the team now for the better versus such a limited sample size that you're going to be getting with someone like star-studded Starling Marte. So definitely let me know how you guys feel about that, because obviously, in the free agent market, there is only one man that reigns supreme that makes the most sense. I just realized Jim Duquette looks not ideal right now. I apologize for pausing you like that, Jim. But there's one guy that makes endless sense for this Mets team on the rotation front. It is obviously the guy that we've been beating this drum for 2+ weeks now, if not longer, and that's going to be Jose Quintana. And we're not going to be too long on the Quintana discussion here because we've talked about him a lot lately, as we did in our video yesterday. But the fact that Jose Quintana is not even on Team Colombia's roster anymore because he apparently has a contractual agreement with the team is telling that we're going to find out where Jose Quintana is going to land probably this week, right? And hopefully it's our New York Mets that we can bring him back, because I would love the innings eater to come back to this Mets team for another year. I think it makes endless sense. If the Mets aren't going to go down the trade route for a starter type, then the free agent route and a guy like Quintana makes sense. But how much are the Mets reluctant to go after someone like him, not only because of their confidence in their in-house options, but the 110% tax for another starter on a 1-year deal? I know that's not appealing for them, and that's why Quintana has not officially signed with the Mets or anywhere yet, but he has unofficially landed with a team. We just don't know exactly who it is yet. So that's what we're all patiently waiting to find out. So the Marte trade talks are certainly going to continue. It wouldn't be shocking if we hear by the end of the week or next week that the Mets already have a trade in place for Starling Marte, or at least there's more rumblings going on there. Should Canario and his reps that he gets the spring training really ball out and make the most of his opportunity, this feels like a true tryout to see what you get in Canario, which could ultimately lead to that demise of Starling Marte. And the reason why I feel confident it will be Marte and not Tyrone Taylor, for example, is because Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri are perfectly fine as a platoon and center. You don't need to have a superior bat there when you have superior bats pretty much in every other position for the Mets for the 2025 season. That's a great thing to say. With Nimmo and Soto in the corners, you can deal with having maybe more of a swing and miss bat in center with some pop like a Jose Siri or a Tyrone Taylor. But Taylor has such limited trade value as is. He is not to the same value as someone like Marte, because if the Mets eat the majority of Marte's contract, he's night and day the better option between himself and Tyrone Taylor when looking at the bat to ball skills. Obviously, defensively, Marte's a lot more limited versus Tyrone, who can be played all over the outfield. But when looking at the bat to ball skill mentality, that's where Starling Marte trumps the two easily in that conversation. And that's why I'm really curious to see if Marte is going to in fact be traded, where everything is looking that way right now. Where is he going to go? How is he going to thrive there? And how much of an opportunity is he going to have versus his very limited one that he has right now with the Mets? But on the Jose Quintana front, I'd love to hear from you guys if you guys are for or against bringing back Hugh, if the Mets are not going to acquire, say, a starter, a depth starter, or any type of pitcher on the trade front from now up over the next couple weeks. I would love to hear it, everybody. Thank you so much for exactly that. And staying on the pitching front, this is going to be very quick for each and every one of you. We do have an update on Kodai Senga, everybody, and you guys can see it along with me up here. Kodai Senga, according to our guy Tim Healy, who does a very good job covering the Mets there through Newsday. See, Kodai Senga won't pitch in Grapefruit League games yet. He is due to make a couple more simulated outings in live BP. Let's see, live BP type settings, including tomorrow, and I quote, a more controlled environment, Carlos Mendoza said. Feedback continues to be positive about Senga's build-up. So naturally, after seeing this, you had a lot of fans saying, oh my goodness, this is a negative. This is not a positive. Well, I don't see how this is really positive or negative. I think this is just a continuation of Kodai Senga, healthy, feeling good, ramping up this spring training, but the Mets just aren't fully comfortable throwing him out there in game action yet, and that's okay. Ronnie Mauricio, for example, isn't going to be getting his first reps until mid-March this spring. Not that's really relevant to Kodai, but just on the sense of we're going to see some guys that we want to see play, not for a little bit yet, right? And Ronnie's the one that we're going to wait a couple weeks for still. But Kodai is a guy that hopefully over this next week, that'll probably be the last that we see him do a couple more of these bullpen simulations, and then we'll hopefully see him out there in a game. Kodai Senga, the Mets have so much relying on him this year in the sense that, God forbid, if anything happens with Kodai in the early going of the season already with Sean and Frankie, your rotation is completely upside down right as the year began. Not that it will be upside down all year long. The Mets can certainly overcome this adversity, but it's not something they want to have to further deal with beyond what they're already going through. Kodai Senga, though, a guy who only pitched in one regular season game where he was nails against the Braves. Of course, he had to go down with injury, and then bang, practice to the Dodgers, the NLCS, and now we are here in 2025. A Cy Young caliber starter when at his best with that fastball and that ghost fork, and Mr. Kodai Senga. So much looking forward to seeing him this spring training, but we're going to have to be a little bit more patient. He's not yet ready to go right out there for these spring training games, but hopefully a week plus from now, we'll have a greater word and a grasp as to when we're going to be seeing him officially out there. But now, guys, let's get into our final segment of this video that I'm also looking forward to breaking down because I'm loving what Brett Baty and Luis Angel Acuña are doing this spring. We already see Baty with another Baty bomb that you guys can see right there. Absolutely. Apologies for the audio playing for a hot second there, but Baty with an absolute tank. Already another home run this spring training. Whether he's pulling baseballs beautifully or hitting for opposite field singles, Baty's doing everything, also while exemplifying strong defense at third base, at second base, and even now starting to get reps at the shortstop position. And speaking of shortstop, and speaking of guys who's been there in the past, or guys that maybe could be a fit there as a backup, we also have Luis Angel Acuña, who ripped himself a leadoff single against Ronel Blanco, which was very impressive today, as Blanco is one of the better pitchers in the Astros organization, that rotation. Mets beat up fairly well today, including Jose Siri hitting a bomb off of him as well. But Acuña, who not only got that single, but also stole second base and then got to third thanks to a throw past the second baseman there. Acuña has been off to a roaring hot start this spring. Struck out a couple times today as well, but that's okay. So now let's get into the big debate on Baty versus Acuña, because right away, when you think experience, you think Brett Baty. And I think between the two, transparently, Brett Baty is winning this right now, and here's why. Baty has, 300 plus AAA games in his career. He really doesn't have, too much Syracuse experience, even in comparison to someone like Vientos had over 100 more games in the minor leagues than Baty. And it shows you just how long it takes some of these guys to finally get to being blossoming as much as they've been, the way that Vientos has and the way that hopefully Baty will as soon as this year. This has to be the Baty breakout year, right? Because if it isn't this year, is it ever going to be in a Mets uniform? He's looking literally tremendous this spring training. Everything about him looks like a guy that should be on this roster, but the big bugaboo with Baty hasn't even been the defense this past year. It's been lifting that baseball and pulling that baseball. Two things he's done terribly throughout his young professional career. That's something that he's working on heavily. We're seeing great early success, even working the Mets hitting lab that they have going along with their pitching lab. Yes, they have a hitting lab too that they're really trying to find greater strides with this year. And Brett Baty is a part of the puzzle making that happen. And the reason why Mendoza is having Baty get reps at shortstop is because the Mets don't have any backup shortstop option for Lindor in a late game replacement. Say his back flares up or something. They just want someone that can handle the position decently at minimum. And that's what they're trying to figure out with Baty right now. Acuña, obviously, I have a level of faith that he'd be able to handle things there for a period of time, just like he did when Lindor went down with injury last year that we know. But this is certainly a situation where Brett Baty's not only bat to ball skills, but the fact that he's a lefty bat really helps him in this debate. Because when you look at the Mets bench right now, outside of Jesse Winker, in which he'll be getting a lot of starting reps in the DH position, the Mets don't have a lefty there. And that's where Brett Baty makes a lot of sense, not only with the minor league options, so that way you're not completely strapped down on him the way that you would be with Jose Iglesias, for example, but Luis Angel Acuña also makes a lot of sense, given his versatility, his tremendous speed. He's such a great base runner that you know that Acuña can make a drastic impact in the game, even with just a bunt single, because that's how important and how athletic, uber athletic of a player that he is, the younger brother of the MVP winner with the Atlanta Braves and Mr. Ronald Acuña Jr. But Luis Angel was trying to make a name for himself, and he did that in a sliver of a sample size for the Mets last year down the stretch, and he was tremendous. Not only was I there in attendance for his first hit of his career against the Philadelphia Phillies in Philly, he then had multiple games like back-to-back home runs that we saw there out for the Citi Field homestand when he got there. It was a great run up until Lindor returned from his injury, essentially. And Acuña was very underwhelming at the minor league level last year, which is why I think in part it wouldn't be shocking if he still begins this year in AAA over a guy like Baty, because Baty has more major league experience. I think Baty also presents a little bit more of what the Mets want right now in that spot than Acuña. I could be wrong, and I'm perfectly fine to be wrong, because I love Luis Angel Acuña. I'm not opposed to him cracking this roster, but you also have to realize that if either cracks the roster, they're going to be in that utility role, which means that they're not going to be guaranteed playing time every day. It may hurt the development of a guy like Acuña more than a guy like Baty, who's already been able to kind of handle coming off the bench, these platoon situations in recent years. That's probably the best route for Baty to blossom at the major league level this year, because he's likely not going to get a consistent starting route the way that he would have if Mark Vientos stayed in blossom this past year. Not the case anymore. So with the pressure not on the shoulders of Baty to be that guy at the hot corner, I really think he's going to continue to flourish like we're seeing this spring. And for Acuña, just continue to play your game. You're so unbelievably athletic that it's just hard to envision you not positively impacting the Mets greatly at some point this year, even if it's not to begin the regular season. And before I let you go, folks, there is one more player the Mets may have in consideration for this utility role, and that's Dalton Walton. Dalton Walton, who has a career like 170 batting average at the major league level, has hit fairly well in the minor leagues, just under 800 OPS or so that the Mets have. He's pretty much this year's version of a Nick Madrigal as Zach Short, a veteran utility option who's basically been a minor league mainstay his entire career, but the Mets like his versatility, they like his upside, and they also like that he's a lefty bat as well, as he went 1-for-3 in his spring training game for the Mets today too. So whether the Mets like a more veteran option or a more exciting higher upside option in Baty, exciting higher upside option in Acuña, we have yet to find out, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how these battles continue, because so far so good. Grab me some popcorn, let's sit back and relax and enjoy the battles in this spring training. But that'll do it for our latest Big Mets update segment. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your biggest takeaways in the comments down below on Starling Marte trade talk. Do you think he's going to be dealt, and if so, where and when? It feels like it's going to happen soon if it's going to happen, because otherwise acquiring Canario just makes a little sense in my humble opinion, knowing he's an outfielder, knowing there's no minor league options, knowing you traded for him, and knowing that he clearly has potential. Why not try to maximize that this spring while you have an opportunity to do exactly that? But that'll be it for me, everybody. Let me hear it on Marte, Acuña, Baty, and everyone else. And this is your guy, Wardy, signing out. Let's go Mets, baby. Peace.